What if the legacy of a beloved pope hid a shadow that could shatter the foundations of the church he led? Can a sister's whispered confession unveil truths too heavy for the world to bear? How could a man revered for his holiness carry a burden of silence that haunted him to his grave? What secrets did Pope Francis entrust to his sister knowing they might never see the light of day? Are you prepared to hear the revelations that could rewrite the history of the Catholic Church? In the quiet streets of Buenos Aires, a woman's voice breaks a silence that has held for decades. Her words raw and unfiltered echo with the weight of a brother's hidden truth. The air in Maria Elena Bergoglio's modest home is heavy with the scent of old wood and faded lavender. The walls adorned with photographs that whisper memories of a time long past. The faint hum of a distant city filters through the window, mingling with the creak of a rocking chair as she sits, her hands trembling slightly, clutching a rosary that once belonged to a boy whose name the world will never know. Shadows dance across the room, cast by a single flickering candle, its flame a fragile light in the gathering dusk, as if the very space holds its breath, awaiting the revelation that will pierce the veil of history. Outside, the evening air carries the distant toll of a church bell, its mournful sound weaving through the streets like a thread of sorrow, a reminder of the loss that has brought her to this moment, a moment where the past and present collide, where the truth demands to be spoken, even at the cost of everything she holds dear. What does it mean to carry a brother's secret, a truth so heavy it could unravel the faith of millions? In the days following the death of Pope Francis, the world mourned a man who had become a symbol of humility, compassion, and peace. At 88, the 266th shepherd of the Catholic Church had left behind a legacy that inspired millions. His final Easter message, a plea for peace in a world torn by conflict, the faithful had gathered in St. Peter's Square, their voices rising in hymns that echoed the joy of the risen Christ. Their hands outstretched as Francis, frail and seated in his wheelchair, blessed the children with a tenderness that belied his physical decline. His words, delivered through an aide, had called for an end to the great thirst for death that plagued the world, a plea for peace in Gaza and Ukraine, a cry for the starving to be given a future of hope, a message that would become his last, a testament to a life devoted to the marginalized, a life that had touched the hearts of believers and non-believers alike. But as tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, a voice emerged from the shadows, one that had remained silent for over a decade, a voice that would change everything the world thought it knew about the beloved pontiff. Maria Elena Bergoglio, the only surviving sibling of Pope Francis, stepped forward with a revelation that stunned the faithful and left the church reeling, a confession that unveiled a side of Jorge Mario Bergoglio that had been hidden from the world, a truth that could rewrite his legacy and shake the foundations of the Vatican. Her decision to speak was not born of a desire for fame or recognition, but of a profound sense of duty, a need to honor her brother's memory by unveiling the burdens he had carried, the secrets he had kept, the truths he had died trying to reveal. For years, Maria Elena had lived quietly in Argentina, far from the spotlight that followed her brother's rise to the papacy. While Jorge, born in Buenos Aires to Italian immigrants fleeing the shadow of fascism, ascended to become one of the most recognizable religious figures in the world, Maria Elena remained in the shadows, her life a quiet testament to the simplicity that had defined their family. She had rarely granted interviews, never sought to profit from his fame, her silence a choice, a shield against the scrutiny that came with being the sister of a pope, a way to protect the private memories she held of the boy she knew as Jorge, not Francis. But something about her brother's death at the age of 88 compelled her to speak, to break the silence she had guarded for so long, to share a truth that was as raw as it was revealing, as emotional as it was controversial. In her first televised statement since his passing, Maria Elena's voice trembled with the weight of memory, her words unfiltered by Vatican officials, untouched by the Church's media machine. "He was not just the Pope to me." She began, her eyes glistening with tears, her voice a fragile thread in the stillness of the room. "He was Jorge, my brother, the boy who chased dogs in the yard, who made me laugh when I was sick, who cried the night our father died." The reporters gathered before her fell silent, their pens poised as they sensed the gravity of what was to come, the air thick with anticipation, the weight of history pressing down like a storm about to break. Then, with a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, she added, "I never wanted him to become Pope. It cost us more than the world will ever know." The statement sent shockwaves through the audience, raising questions that echoed across the globe. Their echoes reverberating through the halls of the Vatican, through the streets of Rome, through the hearts of the faithful who had loved Francis as a shepherd, a father, a voice for the voiceless. What did she mean by "it cost us"? What price had the Bergoglio family paid for Jorge's ascent to the papacy? And why had she chosen this moment days after his death to break her silence to unveil a truth that had been hidden for so long? In the days that followed, journalists and faithful followers alike began to dig deeper, seeking answers to the mystery Maria Elena had unveiled. Their questions a chorus of curiosity and doubt that threatened to unravel the polished image of a pope who had been revered as a saint in life. Maria Elena's memories took her back to Buenos Aires, to a time when Jorge Mario Bergoglio was not yet Pope Francis, but a quiet, introspective boy growing up in a family of Italian immigrants, their home a modest sanctuary in a city alive with the sounds of life. The streets of their neighborhood were a tapestry of color and sound, the scent of empanadas wafting from open windows, the laughter of children echoing through the alleys, the toll of church bells, a constant reminder of the faith that bound their community together. Maria described Jorge as a child with a burden, a boy who seemed to carry something bigger than himself. His dark eyes often fixed on the horizon, as if searching for answers to questions he could not yet name, his small hands clutching a worn rosary as he knelt in the family's tiny chapel, his lips moving in silent prayer. Even as a child, she recalled her voice soft with memory, the scent of lavender in the air mingling with the faint bitterness of mate tea that lingered on her breath. He had this fire about him, a need for justice, for compassion, for penance, a fire that burned brighter than the sun that baked the streets of our city. That fire, Maria revealed, was kindled by their grandmother Rosa, a devout woman whose moral compass was as unyielding as the iron cross that hung above their family's hearth. Rosa was a pillar of the Bergoglio family, her presence a constant in their lives, her words a guiding light for young Jorge. Her hands worn from years of kneading dough and folding laundry, her eyes sharp with a wisdom that seemed to see beyond the veil of the ordinary. Rosa taught Jorge the stories of the saints, their lives a litany of sacrifice and devotion, their martyrdom a testament to the power of faith in the face of darkness. She spoke of the Virgin Mary, her sorrow at the foot of the cross, her love a beacon in a world of suffering, her intercession a promise of grace for those who sought it. She instilled in Jorge a sense of justice, a belief that the church should be a sanctuary for the broken, a refuge for the poor, a voice for the voiceless, a belief that would guide him through the years, even as the shadows of his past threatened to consume him. But Maria's voice grew heavy as she unveiled a darker truth, a trauma that had fractured their family, a betrayal that would shape Jorge's path in ways the world had never known. "There was an incident in our family that left us all broken," she said, her hands tightening around the rosary, her fingers tracing the beads as if seeking solace in their smoothness. A betrayal not of faith, but of blood. The betrayal, Maria revealed, centered on their father, a man whose hidden truth had been covered up for decades, a secret second family, a shadow life that had been concealed from his children, from his wife, from the world that saw him as a pillar of their community. At the age of 12, Jorge learned of this other family, a revelation that stole his innocence and left him reeling, his world shattered like the stained glass window of their parish church, its fragments scattering in the light of a truth he could not unsee. From that moment on, Maria said, her voice breaking the scent of lavender in the air, now mingling with the faint tang of tears, he became obsessed with righteousness. Perhaps in an attempt to cleanse the sins of the people he loved most, a need to restore the honor of a family that had been broken by deceit, a need to find redemption in a world that had betrayed him. The weight of this betrayal, Maria claimed, was the driving force behind Jorge's decision to become a priest, not a divine calling, but an escape, a way to flee the shame that had fractured his family, a way to seek redemption for sins that were not his own, a way to rebuild the moral foundation that his father's actions had shattered. He didn't run to God because he felt called. She said, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo with the pain of decades he ran, because he was trying to escape the shame, to find a sanctuary where he could be whole again, where he could serve a higher purpose that would cleanse the stain of his father's betrayal. The revelation stunned the world, casting a new light on the humility that had defined Pope Francis's papacy, a humility that now seemed to be a form of atonement, a lifelong penance for the sins of his father, a burden that followed him from the streets of Buenos Aires to the hallowed halls of the Vatican. What if the humility of a pope was not just a virtue, but a shield against the shadows of a past? He could not escape a past that shaped every step of his journey to the throne of St. Peter. Maria's voice grew softer as she spoke of her brother's time in the Vatican, a time when the weight of his role became a crucible, testing his spirit in ways he could not have foreseen. Jorge believed there were things the world wasn't ready to know. She said, her voice a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of eternity, the flickering candle casting a glow across her face, illuminating the lines of sorrow etched into her skin, not because they were evil, but because they could unravel everything people believed in. She revealed that her brother had compiled a private collection of documents, letters, and recordings during his time as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and later as Pope, a collection known within the Vatican as Il Dossier Nascosto, the hidden file. This file, she claimed, was never made public, its contents known only to Jorge, a secret he had guarded with a fierce determination, even from his closest advisors, a secret that held the power to expose the darkest corners of the church he had devoted his life to serving. He entrusted me with a letter and a key. Maria said, her voice trembling, her hands reaching for a small wooden box on the table beside her, its surface worn smooth by years of touch, a literal key to a private safe stored in a hidden archive beneath Vatican City. In the letter, Jorge had written cryptically, "If anything happens to me and the world starts asking why I kept silent on certain matters, tell them to look beyond the golden marble. Tell them to look where even light avoids the corner." The revelation sent a chill through the room, the weight of Jorge's words hanging in the air like a storm about to break, the scent of lavender, now mingling with the faint musk of old paper, as Maria opened the box, revealing the letter. Its edges yellowed with age, its ink faded but still legible, a testament to a truth that had been hidden for too long. Maria had never used the key out of respect for her brother's wishes, keeping the letter sealed until the morning of his death. But when she opened it, what she found was a confession that shook her to her core, a confession in Jorge's own handwriting, admitting to a discovery that had tested his faith to its limits, a discovery that had forced him to confront the darkness within the church he loved. He wrote of a web of financial corruption, high-ranking abuse cover-ups, and secret dealings between the Vatican and authoritarian governments, a network of deceit that stretched across decades, a shadow that had haunted him throughout his papacy, a shadow that he had sought to dispel even as the weight of his silence became too much to bear. He didn't name names in that letter, Maria said, her voice heavy with sorrow, her fingers tracing the words as if to draw strength from them. But he left enough clues to let me know that he was caught between his duty as a moral leader and his fear of destroying the church, a fear that kept him silent even as he longed to speak, even as he knew that the truth was the only path to redemption. The hidden file, she claimed, contained evidence of these misdeeds, documents that could expose the darkest corners of the Vatican letters that detailed the silencing of victims' recordings, that captured the voices of those who had sought to protect the church's reputation at any cost. Voices that had haunted Jorge in his dreams. Voices that had driven him to fight for the truth, even as the weight of his silence became a burden he could no longer bear. But Jorge had chosen silence over exposure, not because he was complicit, but because he believed the church could not survive another global scandal, a decision he came to regret in his final years. I wanted to protect the faith he had confessed to Maria, his voice heavy with regret, the scent of incense lingering in the air of his private quarters, the dim light casting shadows across his frail form. But I ended up protecting the system, a system that had become its own form of sin, a system that had forgotten its true purpose, a system that had turned away from the children who needed it most. In his final years, Jorge had come to see the bureaucracy of the church as a betrayal of the faith he held dear, a betrayal that mirrored the one he had experienced as a child, a betrayal that had driven him to seek redemption in a life of service, only to find that the shadows followed him to the throne of St. Peter. In the quiet, dim light of his private quarters, as his strength faded and his breath grew shallow, Jorge had whispered a confession that left Maria shaken, a confession that revealed the depth of his sorrow, the burden of his unfulfilled mission. "Promise me you'll tell them," he had said, his voice barely audible, his hand trembling as it gripped hers. The scent of candle wax mingling with the faint musk of old books. The air heavy with the weight of his words, not just about the dossier, but about the children, the ones who were never counted, the ones the church failed, the ones I couldn't save. The children, Maria explained, were the victims of abuse and mistreatment in remote missions and impoverished parishes, their stories buried under layers of silence and fear, their cries unheard by a world that had turned away, their faces haunting Jorge. In his dreams, their voices a constant reminder of the church's failure. A failure that he had spent his life trying to atone for, a failure that had become his greatest regret. There were entire files that were never logged. Maria revealed, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she spoke the rosary, slipping through her fingers like a lifeline. She could no longer hold cases that bishops were instructed to bury, bribes that were paid to silence witnesses, priests who were quietly relocated, rather than held accountable cases. That Jorge tried to reopen cases that he fought for, even as the weight of resistance became too much to bear. Jorge had sought to give a voice to the voiceless, to bring justice to those who had been forgotten. But each time he met resistance, not just from within the Vatican, but from local dioceses that feared scandal more than justice, from men who valued the church's reputation over the lives of the children, it had failed from a system that had become a labyrinth of deceit, a labyrinth that Jorge had navigated with a heavy heart, knowing that every step brought him closer to the truth, but also closer to the silence that would become his greatest regret. In his final moments, Jorge had given Maria a small wooden rosary, a simple object that held a story of heartbreak, a rosary that had once belonged to a boy in Argentina, a boy who had come to the church for help, but was turned away, a boy who had taken his own life a week later, his death, a silent accusation against the institution that had failed him, a death that had become a symbol of the church's failure, a symbol that Jorge had carried with him for decades, a symbol that had driven him to fight for the truth, even as the weight of his silence became a burden he could no longer bear. "I've carried this for decades," Jorge had whispered, his voice a faint echo in the dim light of his quarters. The scent of candle wax heavy in the air, to remind myself of the price of silence. A price I paid with my own silence. A price I paid with the lives of those I couldn't save. Maria's revelations had already shaken the faithful, but her final confession unveiled a shadow that loomed even larger. A shadow cast by the very institution her brother had let a shadow that threatened to bury the truth he had died trying to reveal. In the modest wooden chest in her home, alongside the rosary and the letter, lay a collection of handwritten pages that could rewrite the history of the Catholic Church. Pope Francis's private journal, a record of his final 2 years, filled with raw reflections, coded warnings, and cryptic references to a web of deceit that had haunted him to his last breath. Jorge began writing daily after a health scare in 2023. Maria said, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow, the flickering candle casting a glow across her face, illuminating the lines of sorrow etched into her skin, when he told me, "I don't know how much longer they'll let me speak freely, but my hand still works, and I will write what my voice can't say anymore." The journal was a descent into both physical decline and spiritual resistance, a chronicle of meetings with high-ranking cardinals who pressured him to remain silent, conversations where he was urged to protect the unity of the church over seeking justice, entries that laid bare the anguish of a man torn between his duty and his conscience. One haunting entry, dated just 3 days before his death, read like a final plea: "If this is my final breath, let it not be in vain. The shepherd must not fear the dark, because wolves howl loudest when they sense the morning." Maria's voice trembled as she shared these words, her hands tightening around the journal as if to shield it from the world that sought to silence it. The scent of lavender now mingling with the faint musk of old paper, the air heavy with the weight of a truth that demanded to be spoken. He wanted the world to know, she said, her eyes fixed on the candle's flame, not just about the dossier, but about the children, the ones who were never counted, the ones the church failed, the ones he couldn't save. The Vatican responded to Maria's statements with a deafening silence, refusing to acknowledge the existence of the hidden file or the journal, their official statements focusing instead on Francis's legacy of peace and humility. Their words a carefully crafted shield against the storm that threatened to break. But behind closed doors, Maria claimed the church was in turmoil with emissaries and anonymous figures reaching out to her. Some with polite requests, others with veiled threats demanding she turn over the journal or remain silent. "They told me it would be better for the church," she said, her voice heavy with defiance. The scent of lavender now mingling with the faint tang of tears, that it could cause confusion and pain if taken out of context. "But Jorge trusted me with this, and I know what he meant. The truth will always cause discomfort before it brings healing." The most chilling revelation came as Maria spoke of Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, a rising figure in the Roman Curia, a man whose name had haunted Jorge in his final days, a man whose shadow now loomed over the conclave that would choose Francis's successor. "They've already chosen him," Jorge had warned, his voice filled with dread, the scent of candle wax heavy in the air of his quarters, the dim light casting shadows across his frail form, and he promised them silence. Maria revealed that Jorge had uncovered correspondence suggesting that Tedesco had made private assurances to powerful factions within the Vatican, assurances that if he became pope, he would not pursue investigations into the unopened files, particularly those concerning abuse cases from the late 1980s through the early 2000s in South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe, cases that Jorge had fought to bring to light, cases that had been buried under layers of silence and fear, cases that had become a symbol of the church's failure, a symbol that Jorge had carried with him to his grave. "They want history to forget what happened." Jorge had warned her, his voice a faint echo in the dim light of his quarters, the scent of candle wax mingling with the faint musk of old books. "But if Tedesco becomes pope, they won't just forget, they'll erase." Maria's words suggested a conspiracy that reached the highest corridors of power, a conspiracy that had outmaneuvered Jorge in his final days, ensuring that the unopened files remained buried, that the truth he had sought to unveil would be silenced by those who valued stability over justice, those who feared the scandal more than the sin, those who sought to protect the church's reputation at the cost of the lives it had failed. Maria spoke of a shift in Jorge's schedule in the weeks before his death. Fewer public appearances, fewer interviews with investigative journalists, fewer mentions of accountability. His voice silenced by the very institution he had sought to reform, his spirit broken by the resistance he faced at every turn. Several of his closest advisors had been quietly reassigned, replaced by figures loyal to Tedesco, their loyalty a shield against the truth that Jorge had fought to unveil, their silence a testament to the power of those who sought to keep the unopened files buried. An apostolic letter calling for full transparency of the church's historical abuse archives had been shelved under pressure just weeks before his passing. Its words a silent accusation against the church that had turned away from the truth, its absence a testament to the power of those who sought to silence it. In the wooden chest beside the journal lay a sealed envelope marked with the words, "In case of betrayal," a final mystery that even Maria had not yet dared to open its contents, a secret that held the power to unveil the full extent of Jorge's discoveries, a secret that could expose the web of corruption he had uncovered, a secret that could hold the church accountable for the sins it had sought to bury. "I've been advised to wait," Maria said, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision, the scent of lavender now mingling with the faint musk of old paper, the air heavy with the weight of a truth that demanded to be spoken to. "Ensure it won't be destroyed or confiscated to ensure that Jorge's truth will endure." Some speculated that the envelope contained audio recordings, private testimonies, or a list of names, evidence that could expose the web of corruption Jorge had uncovered, evidence that could hold the church accountable for the sins it had sought to bury, evidence that could give a voice to the voiceless, a voice that Jorge had fought for until his last breath. Maria revealed that she had received anonymous messages, their words a chilling reminder of the forces that sought to silence her. "Be careful what you say. Your brother died with dignity. Don't make the world question that." The letters arrived in the dead of night, their envelopes unmarked, their words, a shadow that loomed over her. Every thought, a shadow that whispered of the power of those who sought to keep the truth buried, a shadow that threatened to extinguish the light of Jorge's legacy. But Maria was resolute, her voice steady with the defiance of a woman who had nothing left to lose, her hands trembling as she clutched the rosary, its beads a lifeline in the darkness, a reminder of the boy who had died, A reminder of the children Jorge couldn't save, a reminder of the truth that demanded to be spoken. "I can't stay silent," she said, "not when I know what Jorge wanted. Not when I know the truth he died trying to reveal." The families of abuse survivors had reached out to her, their letters a testament to the hope that Jorge's journal might bring justice to those who had been forgotten. Their words a chorus of sorrow and hope that echoed through the years, a chorus that demanded to be heard, a chorus that refused to be silenced. "For them, this journal isn't just history," Maria said, her voice breaking the scent of lavender, now mingling with the faint tang of tears. "It's hope, a hope that the truth will finally be known, that the children Jorge couldn't save might finally find justice, that the church might finally be held accountable for the sins it has sought to bury." The air in Maria's home seemed to grow still, the candle's flame flickering as if in warning, the shadows on the walls stretching like specters of the past, reaching for the light as she spoke of the choice that lay before her. A choice that would define not just her brother's legacy, but the future of the church he had led, a choice that would determine whether the truth would endure or whether it would be buried beneath the weight of Vatican protocol and political gamesmanship. "I'm at a crossroads," she said, her voice steady with the weight of her decision. The scent of lavender now a faint whisper in the air. "To honor the church's silence or to honor my brother's truth. A truth that demands to be spoken. A truth that demands to be heard, a truth that demands to be remembered." The Sistine Chapel, where the cardinals would soon gather to choose Francis's successor, stood as a crucible of history, its walls bearing the weight of centuries, its frescoes a testament to the divine plan. A plan that Jorge had sought to honor, even at the cost of his own peace, a plan that had been tested by the shadows that loomed over his papacy, a plan that now hung in the balance as the world waited for the white smoke that would signal a new era. The air in the chapel would soon be thick with the scent of ancient wood and the faint echo of prayers, the light filtering through the windows, casting a glow across the faces of the cardinals. Their eyes fixed on the future, their hearts heavy with the past, their hands trembling as they cast their votes, their voices a whisper that would determine the fate of the church, the fate of the truth, the fate of the children Jorge couldn't save. But Maria's revelations had cast a shadow over the conclave, a shadow that threatened to darken the legacy of the man they mourned, a shadow that whispered of Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, a man whose rise to power could ensure that the truth remained buried, that the unopened files would never see the light of day, that the children would remain forgotten, their cries unheard, their stories untold. The white smoke that would rise from the chapel's chimney, signaling the election of a new pope, would carry with it a question of whether the truth would endure or whether it would be buried beneath the weight of Vatican protocol and political gamesmanship, a question that would echo through the years, a question that would demand an answer, a question that would refuse to be silenced. The stars above Buenos Aires burned with a light that felt eternal, their glow a silent promise in the darkness, a promise that the truth would endure, that the light of Jorge's love would prevail even in the face of the shadows that sought to silence it. Maria's home, a modest sanctuary in a city far from the Vatican, stood as a testament to the power of truth, its walls echoing with the whispers of a brother who had fought for justice until his last breath, a brother whose legacy called her to be a voice for the voiceless, a light in the darkness, a bridge in a world of walls, a legacy that demanded to be honored, a legacy that demanded to be remembered, a legacy that demanded to be fulfilled. The candle's flame flickered one last time, its light casting a final glow across the room, illuminating the rosary, the journal, the envelope, a trinity of truths that held the power to change the world, a trinity that bore witness to the life of a man who had fought for the truth until his last breath, a man whose legacy called for justice, for mercy, for love. Maria's voice grew soft, her words a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, a plea for the truth to endure, for the light to prevail, for the children to be remembered, a plea that echoed through the years, a plea that refused to be silenced, a plea that demanded to be heard. Jorge wanted the world to know, she said, her voice steady with the weight of her brother's legacy, the scent of lavender now a faint whisper in the air, not just about the dossier, but about the children, the ones who were never counted, the ones the church failed, the ones he couldn't save. The air in Maria's home seemed to grow still, the shadows on the walls fading as the candle's flame burned low, its light a final testament to the truth that demanded to be spoken, a truth that demanded to be heard, a truth that demanded to be remembered, a truth that would endure, a truth that would prevail, a truth that would shine like a beacon in the darkness, a truth that would guide the faithful through the storms of the future, a truth that would honor the legacy of a pope who had fought for justice until his last breath, a pope whose love for the broken would echo through the ages, a pope whose voice would never be silenced. What does it mean to hold a truth that could change the world, to bear the weight of a legacy that demands justice, to stand in the light of eternity and speak the words that others fear, to hear a truth that shines like a beacon in the darkness, a truth that calls us to be a voice for the voiceless, a light for the broken, a bridge in a world of walls?